Last week on this channel, I told you the US-Iran conflict was not just a politics story, it was a money story. That it would hit your gas prices, your grocery bill, your portfolio. I had no idea how right that was going to be. As of right now, today, the Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed. Brent crude oil hit $126 a barrel this month. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, has called this the greatest global energy security challenge in history, worse than the 1970s oil shock. But here's what the news is not telling you. This crisis stopped being just about oil weeks ago. It is now about your phone, your food, your medication, your AI stocks, and a little gas you've probably never thought about that might be the most important supply chain story of 2026. And today, as of this morning, Trump's 48-hour deadline to Iran has expired. Talks are happening, the military is escalating, and nobody knows what happens next. So today we are doing a full breakdown, every thread, every impact, every scenario, and what specifically you should do with your money depending on how this plays out. This is the video I wish existed when I was trying to piece all of this together. So let's build it together right now. Let's start with the basics, because the geography here is everything. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and then to the open ocean. Through those 21 miles flows roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply, about 20 million barrels a day. Not some of the world's oil, not a notable portion. 1/5 of everything the entire planet burns every single day. On top of that, Qatar, which sits directly on the Persian Gulf, produces about 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. All of it exits through the Strait of Hormuz. And in mid-March, Iranian missiles struck Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG facility, the world's largest, taking roughly 18% of global LNG capacity offline almost overnight. On February 28th, after the US and Israel launched strikes on Iran, including the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps responded by issuing warnings to all vessels. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz, and they backed those warnings up with force. As of last week, Iran had made 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships. At least 16 vessels struck in the surrounding waters. The numbers are staggering. Before the conflict, more than 100 ships transited the strait every single day. Since February 28th, 24 days, only 21 tankers have made it through in total. The rest, over 400 vessels, are sitting anchored outside the strait in the Gulf of Oman, waiting, with thousands of sailors aboard, going nowhere. This is not a disruption. This is a blockade, and it is, by every measure analysts can find, the largest single disruption to global energy supply in the history of the modern oil market. Okay, oil above $100 per barrel. What does that actually translate to in your life? The most immediate hit is gas. California is already seeing prices above $5 per gallon. Goldman Sachs has warned that if the strait stays closed, the national average could reach $3.50 or more. And United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby has said he is personally planning for the possibility of $175 oil sustained into 2027. That's the CEO of a major airline. That's not pessimism. That's prudent business planning. But gas prices are the visible tip of the iceberg. Everything that moves by truck, ship, or plane, which is everything you buy, costs more to ship when oil is above $100. That cost gets passed to you. Grocery prices go up, delivery costs go up, manufacturing costs go up. It's an invisible tax on every transaction in the economy. Now here's the piece that connects directly back to our Fed video. When oil spikes like this, it pushes inflation higher. But the Federal Reserve, which just held rates steady at its March meeting, is already under pressure from sticky inflation and a softening job market. Powell used the word uncertain 6 times in his press conference last week when asked about the Middle East impact. If oil stays elevated through summer, the Fed's calculus gets even harder. Cut rates to support the economy, Inflation gets worse. Hold steady or raise. You slow growth at exactly the wrong moment. The stagflation scenario we discussed in a previous video just got significantly more likely, and there is a military wildcard hanging over all of this right now. Trump issued a 48-hour deadline to Iran: reopen the Strait or face strikes on Iranian power plants. That deadline passed this morning. As of right now, talks are described as productive, but Iran is calling it psychological warfare and saying there are no real negotiations. The market is watching every headline. Okay, oil and gas, everyone understands that. But here is the thread that is going to blow your mind, and it connects directly back to our last video on AI and banking. Qatar doesn't just produce LNG. Qatar produces more than 30% of the world's helium as a byproduct of LNG processing. Now, why does helium matter for your money? This isn't about party balloons. Helium is an irreplaceable industrial gas used to cool the equipment that manufactures semiconductors. The chips inside every smartphone, every laptop, every AI server, every car, every MRI machine. You cannot substitute it, you cannot improvise around it. If helium supply is disrupted, chip manufacturing slows down. Here's how severe the disruption is already. In just over a week after the Strait closed, helium spot prices surged 70 to 100% in some markets. South Korea, home to Samsung and SK Hynix, two of the world's largest chip makers, sourced 55% of its helium from Gulf countries in 2025. Taiwan, home to TSMC, which makes the most advanced chips on the planet, sourced 69% of its helium from the same region. The Semiconductor Industry Association warned back in 2023 that a disruption to helium supply would cause shocks to global semiconductor manufacturing. That warning is no longer theoretical. It is happening right now. Analysts at Barclays have flagged the tightening helium market as a direct catalyst. JP Morgan and Wells Fargo have both upgraded industrial gas companies like Lund and Air Products specifically because of this dynamic. What does this mean for you in plain English? Chip shortages could compound this year. Smartphones and computers could get more expensive in the second half of 2026. And the AI infrastructure build-out, the data centers that Goldman Sachs and every major bank are relying on, requires NVIDIA chips that require helium to manufacture. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is not just an energy story, it is a technology story. Let me give you the three scenarios the market is actively pricing and what each one means for your money. Scenario 1, resolution within weeks. Diplomatic talks succeed. The Strait reopens. Oil pulls back toward $85 to $90. Shipping normalizes. The helium crunch eases. This is the scenario where the recovery trade kicks in. Travel stocks, airlines, consumer discretionary, retail, all bounce hard. Energy stocks give back some gains. The Fed gets breathing room to potentially cut rates later in the year. If you've been holding cash on the sidelines, this is the scenario where deploying it into beaten down consumer names pays off. Scenario 2, closure lasts 1 to 3 months. The Defense Intelligence Agency's internal assessment, reported by CNN, estimated Iran could keep the Strait shut for anywhere from 1 to 6 months. The middle scenario is 1 to 3 months. In this case, oil stays above $100. Inflation bakes in. The Fed is frozen. Recession risk rises meaningfully. Chip shortages begin to materialize. Food inflation escalates globally. This is the stagflation scenario we've been warning about, and it becomes very real. Scenario 3, escalation. Trump follows through on threatening power plants. Iran strikes Gulf neighbor energy and water infrastructure as it has threatened. The conflict spreads, oil tests $150 or higher. The global economy enters a demand destruction recession. Shipping collapses. This is the tail risk scenario. Not the base case, but not impossible. Goldman Sachs is not pricing this in as likely today, but multiple intelligence officials have told CNN that the outcome spectrum is wider than at any point in this conflict so far. Here's the full picture as of today. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed for the 24th consecutive day. 400 ships are sitting stranded outside it. Oil hit 120 ceros at its peak. Helium prices have doubled. Taiwan and South Korea's chip supply chains are under pressure. Food and fertilizer costs are rising globally. Ships are rerouting around Africa, adding 2 weeks and thousands of dollars to every shipment. And the IEA says this is worse than both 1970s oil shocks combined. And right now, as in today, Trump has postponed threatened strikes on Iranian power plants, following what he's calling productive talks. Iran says there are no real negotiations. The next 48 to 72 hours could shift scenario 1 and 2 materially. Everything we've covered on this channel over the last month, the Iran conflict, the Fed, tariffs, AI, and banking, it all connects here. This is the story at the center of everything in 2026. If this breakdown was worth your time, like, subscribe, and share it with one person in your life who needs to understand what's actually happening in the global economy right now. That share is how this channel grows and how more people get access to this kind of context. See you in the next one. Stay informed, stay calm.